Have you ever looked at an older man sitting quietly in the corner of a diner, his jacket worn at the shoulders, his steps slightly unsteady, and instinctively thought that the most critical chapters of his life were already behind him? That night, in a small restaurant in Texas, a few people thought exactly that. They laughed. They mocked. They believed they were teasing someone who couldn't fight back. But just 15 minutes later, the entire room fell so silent you could hear your own heartbeat. Because there are people who look completely ordinary until their past walks through the door. The small town, stretching along the federal highway in West Texas, had never offered much to spark curiosity. On Friday nights, the town's only diner glowed with warm yellow light, the scent of apple pie and freshly brewed coffee drifting all the way into the parking lot. Inside, country music played steadily, just loud enough to blur the fragments of everyday conversations from the regular customers. At a table by the window, where neon light spilled down in a faint streak, an older man sat alone. Samuel Whitaker. 74 years old, a flannel shirt worn thin at the collar, a faded baseball cap, old work boots, but carefully polished. Resting beside his chair was a wooden cane, its handle smoothed by years of use. He didn't order much, just a cup of black coffee, no sugar, no cream. Coffee so intense it bordered on bitter, yet he drank it slowly, as if every sip carried its own meaning. Anyone unfamiliar with him would assume he was just an ordinary older man, perhaps someone who had once worked with his hands, perhaps living on a modest pension, perhaps long past his prime, if he ever had one. But the waitstaff here knew better. He always greeted them with a slight nod, always asked about Emily's son, the young waitress, always left a neat tip, even if it wasn't much. He never raised his voice, never complained. His quiet presence felt like a habit, until the diner door swung open. Heavy boots struck the floor. Rough laughter echoed through the room. The Iron Jackal's MC stepped inside, black leather jackets gleaming, their emblem printed boldly across their backs. They took over nearly the entire middle row of tables, ordering beer, burgers, and attention. And then one of them noticed Sam. Rick Hammer Doyle, tall, broad-shouldered, his laugh booming, slowly made his way toward the corner table. "Hey, old man, you lost?" Laughter erupted behind him. Sam didn't lift his head immediately. He set his coffee cup down, gently wiping a slight drop from the table with a napkin. Only when Rick's shadow stretched across and swallowed the tabletop did he calmly look up. There was no fear in his eyes, no challenge, only observation. And it was that calmness that was about to make the situation truly dangerous. Rick wasn't used to that kind of gaze. He was used to avoidance, to fear, to reluctant, lowered heads. But the man standing before him showed none of it. He simply looked back, as if weighing something far more profound than this trivial exchange. "Didn't you hear me?" Rick sneered, dragging out his words in open challenge. Without waiting for an answer, he swung his boot hard into the cane resting beside the chair. The wooden cane hit the tiled floor with a sharp crack, rolling a few turns before coming to a stop beneath the yellow light. The sound wasn't loud, but it was enough to make a few nearby customers flinch. Emily froze behind the counter. The hand gripping the coffee pot tightened until her knuckles turned white. Sam looked down at the cane. He didn't sigh, didn't shake his head. He simply placed both hands on the edge of the table and pushed himself up slowly. His movement wasn't quick and clearly not easy. As he bent down, the fabric of his pant leg shifted slightly, revealing a long scar running down his calf. His knee trembled faintly, not from fear but from the familiar ache that came whenever the weather changed. Rick burst out laughing. "Good Lord, look at that. Careful there, old man. You might break something else." His friends joined in, their laughter hollow and loud. Sam picked up the cane. His hand remained steady. When he straightened, it took him a few seconds to regain his balance. A small bead of sweat slid down his temple. He lifted his head. Less than half a meter separated them. "Don't," he said. Just one word. No growl, no pleading, no bitterness. But there was something in the tone, something that made the air grow heavier for a split second. Rick frowned. He heard it, but refused to accept it. "You giving me orders?" he scoffed. "Who do you think you are?" Sam didn't answer that question. He simply placed the cane back beside his chair, quietly, as if offering Rick one final chance to stop. And that lack of retaliation felt almost like an invisible challenge. Because some people, the more they are underestimated, the less they feel the need to prove anything. And Rick, wrapped in his own arrogance, had no idea he had just taken one step too far. Rick didn't stop. Maybe it was the beer, maybe it was pride in front of his friends, or maybe he simply couldn't stand the feeling of being ordered by an old man. He stepped forward half a pace and grabbed a fistful of Sam's flannel collar. "You think one little don't is enough?" There was a ripping sound. The old shirt couldn't withstand the violent tug. Buttons popped loose, scattering across the tiled floor like fragments of respect being torn apart. In that instant, the diner went silent. Even the country music seemed to fade into the distance. The shirt fell open, revealing Sam's left arm, lean but still solid with strength. And there, an old tattoo. The ink faded by time, yet its lines are still astonishingly clear. The insignia of Delta Force. Not a flashy emblem, no skulls, no flames, no dramatic slogan. Just a quiet mark, meant only for those who understood. Rick frowned. "What's that supposed to be? You think getting that ink makes you look tough?" He reached out, his rough finger brushing against the tattoo. In that split second, Sam's eyes changed. Just slightly. Not explosive anger. Something colder, deeper. Like still water concealing a bottomless depth. The scent of coffee in the diner seemed to disappear. In its place came the smell of hot dust, gunpowder smoke, and burning metal. Sam was no longer in Texas. He was on a shattered rooftop in Mogadishu, 1993. Helicopters roaring overhead. Gunfire erupts from narrow alleyways. One of his teammates lay behind him, shoulders soaked in blood, struggling to maintain radio contact. His leg had been broken minutes earlier. But he didn't leave his position. He returned fire. He stayed until his team was evacuated safely. The memory vanished as quickly as it came. Sam stood once again in the diner, shirt torn open, a crowd watching. He didn't pull the fabric closed. He didn't cover the tattoo, because it had never been meant to impress anyone. He looked at Rick, his voice low but steady. "This isn't for you." It wasn't a threat, just the truth. And in that truth, there was something that made Rick, for the first time, feel that he was touching something far greater than a petty act of intimidation. Behind the service counter, Emily was no longer pretending to polish glasses. She had seen enough. The shirt is torn, the rough finger pressing against the tattoo, and Sam's eyes. Eyes she had never once seen in all the years he had quietly sat here. They were not the eyes of a weak man. They were the eyes of someone who had stared directly into death and survived. Her heart pounded. Years earlier, on a quiet evening, Sam had handed her a small laminated card. "Emily," he had said back then, his voice soft as if he didn't want anyone else to hear. "If something truly serious ever happens, something local police can't handle in time, call this number. Just say my name." She had kept that card in the drawer beneath the cash register. She had assumed it was just an old veteran being cautious. Tonight she understood. It had been a warning. Rick was dragging Sam toward the door. "We're taking this outside, old man," he he growled. No one stood up. No one intervened. Emily turned and hurried into the back room. The small space barely fit an old desk and a few cardboard boxes. She pulled the door mostly closed, just enough to hear the commotion outside still. Her hands trembled as she opened the drawer. The card was still there. A short string of numbers. No company name, no logo, no address. Just a phone number. She took a deep breath and dialed. It rang once. Operations. The male voice on the other end was calm, almost chillingly so. Emily swallowed. I'm at Riverside Diner, Highway 87. I'm calling because of Samuel Whitaker. A pause. Not confusion. Focus. Is Sergeant Major Whitaker safe? The way they addressed him made Emily freeze. No. They're dragging him outside. They tore his shirt. Stay on the line. The voice remained even, but in the background she heard chairs scraping, hurried footsteps. Confirm location. Activate response. Asset is being threatened. Asset. Emily didn't fully grasp the weight of that word, but she understood one thing. She had just tapped into something far from ordinary. Response team is mobilizing, the voice returned. Remain in position. Do not allow the situation to escalate. Emily leaned back against the wall, her heartbeat racing. Outside, Rick burst into laughter. He had no idea that the next 15 minutes would completely change the story he thought he was controlling. Rick had just reached for the door handle when a low, powerful, rhythmic sound echoed from the distance. It wasn't the familiar rumble of trucks along the highway. It wasn't the roar of his group's motorcycles. The sound was synchronized, measured, and approaching fast. The entire diner stilled. Cold white headlights cut through the front windows, casting a blade-sharp wash of light across the floor. Rick turned his head. 3 black SUVs had pulled up in a curved formation directly in front of the entrance, blocking the entire facade of the diner. No sirens, no flashing red and blue lights. Just presence. The vehicle doors opened almost simultaneously. Men stepped out. No flashy uniforms, no ostentatious insignia. Dark, fitted clothing, tactical boots. Every movement was efficient, economical, and precise to a level that felt almost unsettling. They didn't speak. They observed. Within seconds, they had spread out, forming an invisible perimeter around the entrance. Rick swallowed. What the hell is this? The diner door opened, not slammed, just enough. A man in his early 40s stepped inside. Tall, back straight, eyes sharp, like metal honed smooth over time. He didn't look at the bikers first. He looked at Sam, still standing there, shirt torn, cane a few steps away. The man approached, stopped in front of Sam, stood at attention, saluted. The sound of his heel striking the floor rang clearly through the silence. Sergeant Major Whitaker, sir. We received the notification. Rick released Sam's arm as if he had touched a live wire. The diner no longer carried even the sound of heavy breathing. No one spoke. Even the ones who had laughed the loudest didn't dare move. Sam gave a slight nod, a weary nod, but one filled with understanding. Just a minor misunderstanding, he said. His voice hadn't changed, but for the first time Rick realized the man he had just tried to drag outside was not some nameless old stranger. He was someone who made men like these stand straight and salute. And in that moment, the balance of power in the room shifted completely. No one gave orders. No one raised their voice. There was only the truth, stepping quietly into the room and taking up all the space. The young officer lowered his salute, but his posture remained one of absolute respect. He turned to Rick. He didn't step closer. He didn't touch him. He simply looked. There was no impulsive anger in that gaze, only the cold assessment of a man accustomed to analyzing life and death situations. "Do you have any idea whose arm you just put your hands on?" His voice was low and even. Rick didn't answer. The officer continued, each word measured with precision. "Sergeant Major Samuel Whitaker. Joined Special Operations in the early 70s. 3 combat deployments, Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars with Valor, Purple Heart." Each decoration was spoken without flourish. They were simply facts, and that simplicity made the air feel heavier. "During an operation in Mogadishu," he went on, "he sustained a severe leg injury, bone shattered, significant blood loss. He held his rooftop position for over 20 minutes to ensure his team could extract safely. The entire diner seemed to stop breathing." Rick glanced down at Sam's leg. The limp he had mocked moments ago had suddenly become evidence. "That scar isn't an accident," the officer said slowly. "It's a price." No one in the biker group was laughing now. No one looked at Sam as an easy target anymore. Sam gave a slight shake of his head. "That's enough," he said quietly. He didn't want his record read like an indictment against someone else. The officer nodded and stepped back half a pace, as if understanding that genuine respect did not lie in the medals being recited. Sam looked at Rick, not with contempt, not with triumph, just with disappointment. "Do you know what the saddest part is?" he asked softly. Rick didn't respond. "It's not that you tore my shirt." Sam lightly touched the tattoo on his arm. "It's that you think strength means making someone else smaller." The words weren't loud, but they carried farther than any shout could have. And, in the cold white light spilling in from outside the door, for the first time, Rick understood that he had just stood face to face with a man who never needed to prove who he was, because his past had already spoken for him. The sound of police sirens came later than everything else. No longer urgent, no longer frantic, just a formality that needed to be completed. 2 patrol cars pulled up in front of the diner, red and blue lights reflecting off the black SUVs that still stood motionless like blocks of stone. The local officers stepped inside, momentarily taken aback by the scene before them. A group of bikers standing stiff and silent, a specialized response team holding position without visible tension, and at the center of it all, an older man in a torn shirt, one hand resting lightly on his cane. No one had been struck. There was no blood, no brawl, only statements taken in silence. Rick and 2 of his friends were asked to step outside for questioning. No one resisted, no one raised their voice. The arrogance from earlier had dissolved like foam on beer. Before being led out the door, Rick turned to look at Sam. There was no defiance left in his eyes, only confusion, and something that resembled shame. Sam said nothing. He simply stood there, quietly fastening the remaining buttons of his shirt, as if closing a small chapter of the evening. The response team did not linger. They did not need to display their presence. When Sam gave a slight nod to signal that everything was under control, the young officer stepped forward. "Sir, we can escort you home." Sam offered a faint smile. "That won't be necessary," he replied. "I can still drive myself." There was no pride in the smile, only the calm of a man who had lived long enough to know what was worth holding on to, and what should be let go. As the black SUVs pulled away, the diner slowly returned to its familiar warm yellow glow. But the atmosphere had changed. The customers who had once lowered their eyes now looked at Sam differently, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Emily stepped out from behind the counter and placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of him. "Your coffee. It's on." "The house tonight," she said softly. Sam shook his head. "No," he answered. "Everything has its price." He set the money down on the table, exact and neat, as always. Outside, Rick was driven away in silence. But what weighed on him most likely wasn't the report or the charge. It was the moment he realized that the man he had underestimated the most in that room had been the greatest among them. And sometimes, awakening doesn't arrive with a shout. It comes in a silence so deep, it forces you to confront yourself. The small town returned to its familiar rhythm. News of that evening spread faster than anyone expected. Not through newspapers, not on television, just through whispered conversations at the gas station, in the grocery store, at the barber shop. That old man at the diner? He used to be special operations. But Sam didn't change his routine. He still came to the diner on Friday nights, still sat at the table by the window, still ordered black coffee, no sugar. A new flannel shirt buttoned neatly to the collar, as if the night before had never happened. No one dared to bother him anymore. But the truth was, he never demanded that. One afternoon a few months later, as the last sunlight painted the parking lot gold, Sam stepped out of the diner as usual. He walked slowly, but not heavily. His cane tapped lightly against the concrete, steady and measured. Across the street in front of the grocery store, a man was sweeping the sidewalk. Rick. No black leather jacket, no loud laughter, just an orange safety vest and a face more hollow than before. When Rick looked up, their eyes met. Only a few meters apart, yet the distance felt far greater. Rick froze. The broom stopped mid-air. There was no arrogance left in his gaze, no fear either. Only awareness. He gave a slight nod, short, stiff, as though it had taken considerable courage to manage. No apology, no excuse. Just acknowledgement. Sam looked at him for a few seconds. He could have turned away, could have ignored him, could have allowed that shame to grow heavier over the years. But he didn't. He gave a nod in return. Slow. Clear. Not to forgive what had happened that night, but to give Rick a chance not to be defined forever by his worst mistake. Sam opened the door of his old pickup truck. Before getting in, he spoke just loudly enough for Rick to hear. Strength isn't about making others fear you. He paused for a beat. It's about knowing what you're capable of and choosing not to use it. Rick lowered his head. Evening settled slowly. Sam drove away, leaving behind not a lesson delivered by fists, but by composure. And perhaps, in each of our lives, there will be a moment like that, when we must choose between ego and character. Respect cannot be forced. It can only be chosen. And sometimes, that choice begins with a nod. Time passed, and the story of that evening gradually settled like a wave after a strong wind. The small town returned to its familiar patterns. Trucks rumbling along the highway, children riding bicycles on the sidewalks, and the scent of freshly cut grass every weekend. But for those who had been inside the diner that night, something had changed, forever. They began to see differently. Not only did they see Sam differently, they saw everyone differently. The man sitting alone in the corner was no longer just an old stranger. He became a living reminder that a person's past can run far deeper than what appears on the surface. Sam continued living his simple life. In the mornings, he woke early, brewed his own coffee, sometimes trimmed the lawn in front of his small house. In the evenings, if he felt like it, he stopped by the diner and sat in his usual place. He never retold the story, never mentioned the response team, never spoke about Mogadishu. Because to him, those things were not stories to be told. They were promises. Promises to the teammates who never came home. to the younger men still carrying the mission forward, to his own conscience. Once, when Emily asked softly, "Do you ever wish you had lived a more peaceful life?" Sam smiled. "Peace isn't the absence of war," he said. "Peace is knowing why you fought." The answer wasn't loud, but it lingered. Because we often think heroes are the ones who appear in climactic moments, when the spotlight is on them and all eyes are watching. But the truth is, heroes spend most of their lives in silence. They walk a little slower because of an old wound. They don't show off their tattoos. They don't talk about their medals. They simply keep the promises they made. And perhaps the most unsettling realization isn't that you've touched someone who once walked through a battlefield. It's realizing you almost mistreated a human being simply because you didn't know their story. "You never know what the person across from you has endured," Sam once said. "So choose kindness before you choose judgment." Some lessons are never written in books. They are carved into memory. And sometimes they begin on an evening that seemed entirely ordinary. If you were to return to that diner on any given evening, you wouldn't see black SUVs parked outside, no cold white headlights, no response team standing in formation. You would only see an older man sitting by the window, his hand resting on a cup of black coffee that has grown lukewarm, his eyes fixed on the highway as if watching something very far away, yet also very near. Life rarely ends with swelling music. It ends with simple habits continued. Sam did not become the town's celebrity. He wasn't invited to give speeches. No banners were hung in his honor. He still drove his old pickup truck, still pumped his own gas, and still repaired the fence in front of his house when strong winds knocked it down. But something had changed. The people in town began to slow down before mocking someone. They thought twice before judging a person by appearance. And perhaps that was the most significant victory of all. Not that the biker group was detained, not that a special response team appeared, but that one man chose not to use his power to harm someone else. Before leaving the diner one late afternoon, Sam once said to Emily, "Honor isn't about other people knowing who you are." He paused briefly. "It's about who you are when no one is watching." The words weren't loud, but they followed people home. Because each of us carries a past that others cannot see. Each of us bears scars that are not always visible. And every day we stand before a choice: to appear strong by putting someone else down, or to remain quiet and hold on to our character. You may never need a special response team. You may never have to hold a rooftop position under gunfire. But you can still choose kindness, choose respect, choose to do what is right, even when no one requires you to. Because in the end, true strength isn't about making others fear you. It's about having the power to cause harm and choosing not to. If this story made you reflect, share it with a friend. They may also need the reminder that quiet heroes still live among us. Leave a comment about the moment in the story that touched you most. And if you believe that honor, courage, and kindness still matter in today's world, walk with deep life tales in the stories to come. Because sometimes what we need isn't a grand lesson, just a story deep enough to remind us to live better.